A family in Ohio spent 11 years living above a slow, silent leak they never knew existed. And by the time anyone noticed, the wood holding up their kitchen floor had turned to soft, crumbling pulp. Nobody heard it. Nobody smelled it until the very end. The house looked perfect from the outside, and that is exactly what makes this kind of disaster so terrifying. If you're the kind of person who wants to know what's really happening behind your walls and underneath your floors before it becomes a 5-figure repair bill, stick around, because every week we dig into the hidden construction failures that quietly wreck American homes. And this one might be happening in a house near you right now. It started, as these stories almost always do, with something so small that nobody thought twice about it. A single pipe joint, tucked behind a wall in a laundry room, wasn't tightened quite right during the original plumbing install. Not loose enough to spray water everywhere. Not loose enough to trigger an alarm or a puddle on the floor. Just loose enough to weep. A slow, steady drip, invisible behind drywall, dripping onto a wooden floor joist, day after day, year after year. Picture a beautiful 2-story home, freshly painted, new appliances gleaming in the kitchen, a family moving in with excitement, completely unaware that somewhere beneath their feet, moisture is already beginning its quiet, patient work. This is the part almost nobody thinks about when they buy a house. The plumbing looks fine, the water pressure is fine, nothing visible is wrong. But wood and water have a relationship that unfolds in secret, and by the time it becomes visible, the damage is usually already severe. Here's where it gets interesting. Wood doesn't need to be soaked to fail. It just needs to stay damp, consistently, for a long period of time. That constant low-level moisture creates the perfect environment for wood decay fungi, the organisms responsible for what contractors grimly call dry rot, even though the wood is anything but dry when the damage happens. Over months, and then years, the fibers inside the wood break down, turning solid structural lumber into something closer to wet cardboard. At first, it doesn't seem like a serious problem. Maybe the family notices the laundry room floor feels slightly spongy underfoot. Maybe a cabinet door starts sticking for no obvious reason. These are the kinds of details most homeowners brush off, blaming humidity or an old house settling. But these tiny signs are the house quietly screaming for help, and almost nobody speaks that language. Now imagine the same scenario, but handled the professional way. A licensed plumber pressure tests every joint after installation, checking for even the smallest drop in pressure that could indicate a hidden leak. Inspectors use moisture meters against walls and floors near plumbing runs, catching problems while they're still just problems, not catastrophes. This is the difference between a 5-minute fix costing almost nothing and a repair that eventually tears open an entire section of house. Prevention is boring. Disaster is expensive. Most homeowners don't realize that until it's too late. But the biggest mistake hadn't even happened yet. As the years passed in this house, the slow drip kept doing its work, and the homeowners kept living their lives, blissfully unaware. Then came the real disaster, the kind that turns a hidden problem into a visible one overnight. It wasn't the leak itself that caused the final collapse. It was something a plumber did years later, when the family called for a simple washing machine hookup upgrade. The plumber working that day had no way of knowing about the years of hidden decay beneath the floor. He needed to access a section of pipe, so he did what plumbers often do in older installations, applying gentle pressure on a fitting to loosen it. In a healthy floor, this movement would have meant nothing. But this floor wasn't healthy anymore. The joists beneath had been silently rotting for over a decade, and the added weight and pressure was the final straw. What happened next surprised even the plumber standing right there. A section of the laundry room floor gave way with a sickening crack, dropping several inches in an instant. Thankfully, nobody was standing on it at that moment, but the damage was now undeniable, exposed, and impossible to ignore. What had been a hidden, invisible problem for 11 years suddenly became an emergency. This is the moment homeowners often describe as the scariest part of any home repair story. The moment when a small, visible problem reveals a massive, invisible one. Once the flooring was pulled up, the true scale of the disaster became clear. The joists weren't just weakened. They were completely compromised across a wide section of the room, some of them crumbling apart with almost no resistance at all. What should have been a simple repair job had become a full structural rebuild. This hidden detail changes everything about how we should think about plumbing in our homes. Most people imagine plumbing failures as dramatic bursts, floods, and emergencies you'd notice immediately. But the far more expensive and far more common disaster is the slow leak, the quiet one, the one that gives a house years to fail in silence before anyone realizes anything is wrong. Let's talk about why this particular mistake happens so often across American homes, because the laundry room example is far from unique. Underneath sinks, behind toilets, inside walls where supply lines run, and especially in older homes with galvanized or outdated piping, small leaks like this exist far more often than people assume. The plumbing industry actually has a name for these hidden failures. They're called slab leaks when they happen under concrete foundations, and they're some of the most feared words a homeowner can hear from an inspector. Now picture a completely different home. This one built on a concrete slab foundation, common across huge parts of the American South and Southwest. Here, the pipes don't run through walls and floors the way they do in a house with a basement. Instead, they run directly underneath the concrete slab itself, buried in the earth before the concrete was even poured. When something goes wrong down there, you can't just open a wall to look. The pipe is entombed. Most homeowners never notice this until strange things start happening above ground. A section of flooring feels unusually warm, which sounds harmless, but is actually a red flag, because it often means hot water is escaping underground and heating the slab above it. Or maybe the water bill quietly climbs higher every month with no clear explanation. Or the family starts noticing a faint, musty smell that seems to come from nowhere in particular. These clues are easy to miss individually, but together they tell a very specific and very expensive story. Somewhere beneath the concrete, a pipe has cracked, and water is escaping directly into the earth and up through the slab. Left unaddressed, this kind of leak can undermine the soil supporting the foundation itself, causing sections of concrete to shift, crack, or sink unevenly. What began as a plumbing problem has now become a structural one, and structural problems are where real money starts disappearing. Here's the part that catches most homeowners completely off guard. In cases like this, fixing the plumbing might actually be the easy part. Modern repair techniques allow plumbers to reroute pipes entirely, running new lines through the attic or along interior walls instead of cutting into the slab at all. It's faster, cleaner, and often more reliable long-term. But repairing the foundation damage that resulted from months or years of unnoticed water intrusion, that's where costs can spiral dramatically, sometimes requiring engineered foundation repair with steel piers driven deep into stable soil to stop further movement. Compare that to a home where the builder did things the right way from the start. Quality plumbing installations use pressure testing before the concrete is ever poured, catching leaks while the pipe is still fully accessible, and repairs are simple. Some builders even install accessible sleeves around slab pipes, specifically so future leaks can be addressed without demolition. The difference between a home built this way and one that wasn't might be invisible on move-in day, but it becomes the difference between a minor repair and a life-altering expense a decade later. Now comes the part that costs homeowners the most money, and it has nothing to do with the pipes themselves. Water, once it escapes its intended path, doesn't just disappear. It travels. It seeps into wood framing, soaks into insulation, climbs up drywall through capillary action, and settles into dark, enclosed spaces where it can linger for weeks without anyone noticing. And wherever water lingers in the dark, mold is never far behind. This is the silent second disaster hiding inside so many plumbing failures. The pipe might get fixed in an afternoon, but the moisture it released has already begun growing something far more complicated to deal with. Mold spores are present in nearly every home's environment already, floating invisibly through the air, waiting for the right conditions. Damp wood, poor airflow, and darkness are exactly the conditions they need to establish colonies that spread quietly behind walls, inside cabinets, and underneath flooring. Picture a bathroom vanity being removed months after a slow supply line leak was finally discovered and fixed. Behind that cabinet, hidden from view during the actual repair, dark patches spread across the back wall, spores clinging to damp particle board. A smell finally strong enough to notice once the cabinet door swings open. This is what many homeowners describe as the true horror moment of a plumbing disaster story. The discovery that fixing the leak wasn't actually fixing the problem. Professional remediation at this stage requires far more than a wrench and a new section of pipe. It requires cutting away and safely disposing of contaminated materials, thoroughly drying the affected area with industrial equipment, and in serious cases, testing the air quality throughout the home before anyone can be confident the danger has passed. What could have been a $200 plumbing repair caught early can transform into a project costing thousands once mold remediation, drywall replacement, and repainting enter the picture. There was one critical mistake almost nobody noticed in either of these stories, and it's the same mistake responsible for a huge percentage of plumbing disasters across the country. It isn't a single dramatic failure. It's the absence of regular inspection. Both of these homes could have avoided their worst outcomes entirely if someone had simply looked at the right time in the right place. This is where the wrong approach and the right approach really separate from each other. The wrong approach treats plumbing as something you only think about when it breaks. Water's flowing, the toilet flushes, everything seems fine, so why worry? The right approach treats plumbing the way a pilot treats a pre-flight checklist, understanding that small, boring, routine checks are what prevent catastrophic failures down the line. Professionals recommend homeowners walk through a simple routine every few months, checking under every sink for even the faintest hint of moisture, watching the water meter with all fixtures turned off to catch a leak that might be running invisibly somewhere in the system, and paying attention to water bills for unexplained spikes. None of this requires special tools or expertise. It just requires the discipline to look before there's an obvious reason to. But even the most careful homeowner can miss what's hidden behind finished walls, which is exactly why professional inspections matter so much, especially in homes over 15 or 20 years old. Thermal imaging cameras can detect temperature differences in walls that hint at moisture even before any visible sign appears. Moisture meters can be pressed against baseboards and drywall to catch dampness invisible to the naked eye. These are the same kinds of tools that could have caught both disasters in this story years before they became emergencies. There's another kind of plumbing mistake worth understanding, one that has nothing to do with hidden leaks at all, and everything to do with what happens when homeowners try to save money by skipping professional installation entirely. Across the country, a massive number of DIY plumbing projects begin with good intentions and end with expensive consequences, simply because plumbing looks far simpler than it actually is. Picture a homeowner replacing an old water heater themselves over a weekend to save on labor costs. The new unit gets installed, connections tightened by hand, and everything appears to work perfectly. But without a proper expansion tank, or without correctly sized venting for the exhaust, that seemingly successful installation is actually creating pressure and safety issues that won't show themselves immediately. Weeks or months later, a fitting under constant excess pressure finally fails, sometimes flooding an entire basement or utility closet in a matter of minutes. This is one of the clearest examples of cheap versus professional in the entire plumbing world. A licensed plumber doesn't just connect pipes, they understand code requirements built specifically to prevent these exact failures. Requirements around pressure relief, proper venting, and correct pipe sizing that exist because someone, somewhere, learned these lessons the hard way. Skipping a permit or an inspection might save a few $100s up front, but it removes the safety net that catches mistakes before they become disasters. At this point in the story, it's worth stepping back and asking the question every homeowner eventually asks themselves. How could all of this have been prevented? And the honest answer is refreshingly simple. Most catastrophic plumbing failures trace back not to bad luck, but to skipped steps. Skipped pressure tests, skipped permits, skipped inspections, skipped moisture checks, skipped attention to small, easy-to-ignore warning signs. The homes that avoid these disasters aren't necessarily the ones with the most expensive plumbing systems. They're the ones where someone, whether a diligent homeowner or a thorough contractor, treated small details with the seriousness they deserved. A slightly warm patch of flooring gets investigated instead of ignored. A slow drop in water pressure gets checked out instead of dismissed as normal aging. A cabinet door that suddenly sticks gets a second look instead of a shrug. There's something almost poetic about how these disasters unfold. The damage that eventually costs tens of thousands of dollars and tears apart a family's sense of security in their own home usually starts as something almost embarrassingly small. A joint not quite tight enough. A pipe laid without enough slope for proper drainage. A shortcut taken during an installation nobody thought would matter. Small decisions, made in seconds, quietly determining the fate of a house years down the road. What makes plumbing especially dangerous, compared to other home systems, is precisely this delay between cause and consequence. A cracked window shows itself immediately. A broken appliance stops working right away. But a plumbing mistake can hide successfully for years, sometimes even decades, patiently waiting behind walls and beneath floors until the exact wrong moment to reveal itself, often during an unrelated repair, a renovation, or simply the slow accumulation of enough damage that it can no longer stay hidden. Understanding this changes the way a smart homeowner should think about their house. It's not enough for water to come out of the faucet correctly today. The real question worth asking is, what's happening in the places you can't see? Behind the drywall, beneath the slab, inside the walls where a mistake made years ago by someone you'll never meet might still be quietly working against you. The good news buried inside all of this is that awareness itself is powerful protection. Homeowners who understand these hidden risks ask better questions before buying a house. They request plumbing inspections that go beyond a simple visual check. They pay attention to small, strange details instead of dismissing them. They choose licensed professionals who pull permits and follow code, even when it costs more up front, because they understand that the invisible parts of a home are often the parts most worth protecting. For the family in that Ohio home, the story eventually had a resolution, though not without real cost and real disruption to their lives. The rotted joists were removed and replaced with new, properly treated lumber. The original leaking joint was finally repaired correctly, tested under pressure this time to make absolutely certain nothing was left to chance. The floor was rebuilt from the ground up, stronger and safer than it had ever been, and this time moisture barriers and access panels were added specifically so any future issue could be caught early instead of hiding for another decade. It's a reminder worth carrying into every home, whether newly built or decades old. The most dangerous problems in a house are rarely the ones that announce themselves loudly. They're the quiet ones, the patient ones, the ones content to wait behind a wall for years, doing their damage slowly, until one ordinary afternoon turns into the day everything finally comes to light. If this kind of hidden construction investigation fascinates you the way it fascinates us, come back next week, because there's another house out there with a story just waiting to be uncovered, and you'll want to be here when we pull back the walls to find it.